Testing, testing.
Good evening, and welcome back to the Wednesday Night Photo Show with Dan's Camera City, our little semi-weekly chance to get together and chat photography. Tonight's episode is all about getting started with wildlife photography and exploring some ideas that you don't have to go real far to get started and to have a good time and to get some great pictures. And with me tonight, we've got our own Steve Miller. Steve, you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about how long you've been a photographer and maybe kind of how you got into doing wildlife photography.
Sure. Again, Steve Miller. I've been at Dan's for 17 years. I've been doing wildlife photography prior to that. I started around 1998, so of course that meant film. And I just had an interest in capturing the things that I saw because I really liked going on hikes out in nature.
Okay. And it's just kind of a thing that you've kept on doing, right?
Yeah, photography has always been a medium for me to be able to share with others some of the experiences that I have, the emotions that I have, and like I said, just the things that I see.
Cool. All right, so the idea tonight was to take some of... Now, I don't know if you've seen some of Steve's work posted on our Instagram before or posted on Steve's own Instagram, or even on the wall behind us over there. A lot of these really cool wildlife shots that you see around the store at Dan's, those are from this guy. So when we wanted to talk a little bit about wildlife photography, Steve was the one we decided to go to like immediately, right? So rather than getting into like, we talked a lot we do wildlife photography. We talk about like Buddy was on and had all these great trips to Africa and somewhere down in Florida for birding, but we wanted to take a look at stuff a little closer to home this week. I see we got a bunch of people joining us tonight, so if you've got questions as we're rolling through this stuff, just throw them in the comments, and we will answer your questions live on the show.
Please.
So, yeah. Makes us feel like we're not just talking to ourselves out here. So, I guess, so where do we get started? If I want to start doing some wildlife photography, and maybe I'm new to wildlife photography in general, because I'm not a wildlife photographer myself. What's the best way for me to just kind of get started with this thing?
Sure. So you want to identify what's available to you. Obviously, we don't have things like the wildlife in Africa, but we do have a lot of really interesting wildlife that's very rewarding to photograph. So just in Lehigh Valley, I've personally photographed, of course, white-tailed deer, foxes, mink, muskrat, possums, raccoons, lots of birds. You know, we have tons and tons of songbirds that are going to be coming through in the next month or so because they're migrating. So
Hi, Rachel.
Really good. Hello. Really good opportunities, and you don't have to travel far. I'm actually going to show a bunch of images that were taken here in the Lehigh Valley. So that'll hopefully inspire you guys to get out and give it a try.
Very cool. All right. So first steps, I guess let's take care of the boring stuff first, which is right. When we talk about camera settings, the stuff that we can kind of dial in and figure that's kind of where we're going to be. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, so ideally everyone has an interchangeable lens camera, but even if you don't, you can still get good wildlife images. Zoom is your best friend. Typically when recommending to customers in the store or outside of the store, someone looking to do wildlife, 400 millimeters is kind of the minimum. A lot of times,
that much.
A lot of times people will come in, asking for like a 70 to 200 or something like that. And they're great for zoos, but unless the animals are really, really used to people, the animal's going to look pretty small in the frame, even on a crop sensor camera, and especially on a full frame. And as far as settings go, you want the camera to prioritize stopping action because you don't know if you're going to see an animal that's completely stationary, or it could be a bird flying or an animal running. And if your settings aren't right, you're not going to be able to dial in the settings while the action's happening. You kind of want to anticipate where you'll see the animal, possibly even as specific as, I expect the animal to be more in the shade this time of day, because animals don't generally like to be in the full sun, especially if it's warm. So you set your exposure accordingly to that.
Okay. All right. So long lens, fast shutter speed. Right.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
There's a bunch of finer points if someone wants to, get a little bit more advanced with it. Ideally, aperture, shutter, or manual. Hopefully, everyone
Okay.
has a chance to explore those. They basically give you a lot more control when your animal is not in the best lighting or mixed lighting, because there's nothing worse than getting a silhouette when you don't want a silhouette.
Right.
So that's something to keep in mind. Your ISO needs to be high. Sometimes people think it's crazy that you're going to be shooting ISOs like 3,200 or even 12,800, but animals aren't active in the middle of the day. To the person that said what time to photograph wildlife. We'll actually get into more specifics based on the subject, but a lot of times you're pretty much done by 8 or 9 in the morning, and it doesn't make sense to go back out until 5 or 6 in the evening. So,
okay, interesting.
Yep.
All right, so we can basically kind of practice with stuff that is right in our backyard, right? Like
that's right.
That's a pretty good way to kind of get started and get some practice in.
Yeah, and you can make awesome images. You don't have to travel far. I actually photograph even on my lunch break here at Dan's sometimes.
Nice.
Even
So
though
what are we
wildlife
looking
isn't
at?
active then.
What's that?
I said even though wildlife isn't as active then, you can still get things like robins and sometimes, bunnies and other things like that. So.
Right. Neat. All right, so let's see. So if we're looking at backyard animals, like what kinds of, say we're going to be out there first thing in the morning?
Yeah.
Or like, okay, so this is the thing, like, okay, before work, plan on going outside and spending a little time out there. Because like you said, like by 8 or 9 a.m., you're already done, right?
Yeah, basically, I can count on one hand the number of shots that I've gotten that were not, in those windows of time. Just randomly, sometimes driving, something will run across the road and you're fortunate enough to get a shot or two of the animal. But that's an animal that, is likely, not going to be there regularly. If you came to that same area early in the morning or late in the evening, you'd be much more likely to see it. So.
Okay, so sunrise, sunset, those are our times.
Basically the first 2 hours of daylight and a little bit before, so even before the sun comes up, and then the last 2 hours of daylight. And you can actually sometimes photograph even a half an hour after sunset with some of the modern cameras. So.
Oh, right. So this is where that ISO performance is really going to be key, right?
Yeah. The lowest ISOs you usually shoot with wildlife is 400, and that's not real common. Typically, you're going to be much higher than that.
Right. So, like, I'll just you've got a sample here I'm going to throw up on the screen.
Sure.
So something like that guy.
Yeah, so this is the exception. Some bird species, especially birds that feed on the ground, are actually very active in the middle of the day. This was taken at like 1 in the afternoon, and it was taken right here at Dan's. I thought it would be really neat to try to time the robin pulling worms out of the ground. And some of the tricks that helped me do this is having a camera that could shoot very quickly. The camera that I use can take 20 pictures a second. Your camera doesn't need to do that. But having a camera that can get at least 5 or 10 gives you many more chances to try to get something like this where you're not constantly missing it and getting frustrated.
Gotcha. All right. So we talked a bit about like, okay, so shutter speed, the longest lens that we can get. Right. How about some other settings that we're going to work on? Like what's your focus and your metering look like?
Yeah. So typically when photographing subjects that don't have busy backgrounds, I like to use a zone, which is not a really small, precise area, but it's also not the full width of the image sensor. So zone is kind of a good in between because it has some precision, but it gives me a little bit of leeway in case the animal is very active and moving around to be able to keep that pattern on the subject.
Got it. So you got a bigger target to keep on them there.
Yeah, so that would be like dynamic group 25 in Nikon. Sony just calls it zone. Canon allows you to pick a smaller group on most of their cameras from like the 80D on up.
Okay.
And it does as well. So
yeah.
And
all right,
for those that want to get a little bit more advanced, I would highly recommend. I'm going to pick my camera up. Hopefully you can see this well.
Oh yeah.
On the back of most cameras, there's controls that allow you to actually do the focus from the back of the camera as opposed to from the shutter button. And that gives you a lot more control over when the camera does or doesn't focus. Things like bushes in the foreground or busy backgrounds can ruin pictures because the camera wants to grab those things. This puts you in control and tells the camera, no, I only want you to focus right at this moment. And you can even take it a step further and actually have that zone or wider field on one button and then a smaller, more precise single point on a separate button. And if anyone ever wants to do that, I can certainly walk you through how to do that on your camera.
Okay, so this is the back button focus that you hear people talk about, right?
Back button focus. It's the best thing you can probably do from wildlife standpoint of photographing wildlife and sporting events too. Anytime where you really need to control how the camera's focusing and when it's focusing.
All right. And is that something that kind of sounds like the kind of thing that you want to practice with a little bit?
That's right. Yeah, people, if they go to, like, say, Conowingo Dam for bald eagles, or they go to a place where there's a lot of wildlife and they haven't practiced, sometimes they get frustrated because then they hit, the shutter button and not press with their thumb, and they're like, why is it not in focus? And that's why. So definitely practice, and that's where those robins and other subjects that are much more common are really handy because they still count too.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Yeah. So let's see. What kind of a thing so we talked about like ISO. What kind of cameras are we looking at there in terms of like, so give me like a setup for like, I'm just getting started and I might be interested in wildlife photography. And then we'll talk about like maybe your next step, what you would upgrade from there.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to grab a little lens. This is a 70 to 350 lens. What's unique about this compared to previous 70 to 300s, it focuses extremely quickly. Most 70 to 300s, there was oftentimes trade-offs with how well it could track a moving object. This is a lens from Sony. It's made to be like the first entry into a wildlife lens without getting too big or heavy. And it focuses faster than pretty much any lens in the under, like, say, $1,500 price point that's that much reach. And then in other brands, Nikon has used a similar technology. Their AFP piezo type motors, they're very quick. And Canon has their STM or stepper motor. They're not quite as quick, but they're definitely faster than the previous USM motor lenses that were very common on DSLR cameras from the 90s into the 2000s.
Okay, so it's that focus speed is what we're looking for there.
Wildlife doesn't like to wait around, and this is a little bit more approachable for a lot of people. These lenses are in the $200 to about $1,000 range, as opposed to multiple thousands of dollars.
Gotcha. Okay. So, like, if you were really going to go all out, like, what's the Steve Miller lens?
Well, previously when I had shot Canon and Nikon, I had an $8,000 500 millimeter. It was a faster aperture. And the reason I own that is the ISO performance at the time when I owned those lenses wasn't that great above, say, 3200. So to offset that, I had to have a lens help me and gather more light. Now, for the last 3 years or so, I've been shooting with the Sony 200 to 600, which I'll say this, it's only a $2,000 lens, and it's still an expensive lens, but it's not $8,000. And it basically allows me to take the exact same photos that I did with a lens that cost 4 times as much and also weighed about double. So my mobility and ability to get farther in to find subjects is much, much better. And we'll talk a little bit more about technology that allows you not to have to be on a tripod. Like, I mentioned this to a coworker tonight. He's like, how much are you going to talk about tripods? And I said, for our customers, they're a great tool, especially if they don't have the anti-shake. But if you do have the anti-shake, you might not have to use a tripod anymore for wildlife.
Really?
Even though I love to sell tripods,
Right.
It's just the stabilization is so good that it's not as necessary.
Wow. Okay, so it's really coming down to the improvements in camera hardware are changing what kind of a lens that you need to use.
That's right. Yeah. So the people that were used to like 500 f4s and 300 2.8s, they'll see this lens and they'll be like, oh, that's a 6.3 aperture. That's really slow.
Mm-hmm.
But in reality, if your camera can shoot 6400 ISO or 12,800 ISO, it's the same light gathering as what you had before.
Right. Cool. Okay, so we've got a question Let's see. With a camera that
That's a
does
good
20
question.
frames per second, are you often
Yeah.
doing bursts of less frames than that for a particular shot? You're not always just holding it down until the buffer fills, are you?
So
That's a
that's
lot of
that's a
frames.
common thing when people first get a camera like that. They decide that it's a good idea for some reason to just hold the shutter down and fill up the buffer, and you have 430 images of the same subject that are almost identical.
Uh-huh.
So I'm somewhat judicious. I look for peak action. I'm not afraid to fire 20 frames a second, but it's in very short bursts. It's 1 or 2 seconds. Like the shot of the robin,
Mhm.
that is 1 frame out of 13. So I didn't even have the shutter down for 1 whole second as the robin pulled the worm out of the earth.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah.
So let's see. Is there any other, say the technical side of things before we start talking about things like animal behavior?
As far as technical, there's not too much more that I can go into. I don't want to make it confusing. Not that I don't think anyone here could do it, but it's kind of like you open Pandora's box depending on what level you take it to, and then the entire presentation is on the technical side of things.
Right.
I'm a huge proponent, even though I love technology. I want to try to keep it as simple and approachable for everyone that may not be as keen on technology.
Mhm.
Like I think it's a wonderful thing that a lot of these cameras now, regardless of the brand, you can put it in sports mode, and it's going to do most of the things that I've been describing that you would have to kind of learn, how to set all those things.
Right.
And actually, the cameras now work very well in sports mode. It's kind of scary, actually.
Right.
Kind of erasing decades of experience with one setting on the camera.
Yeah, and I mean, like you talked about starting out on film, and the fact that you get that immediate feedback now, you can immediately take a look at your pictures, zoom in to 100%, check to see if the eyes are in focus.
That's right.
Like we couldn't do that on film.
We could not. And speaking of, eye focus, a lot of the cameras now from Canon, Nikon, and Sony will actually identify an animal's eye. So previously, it was your job, you kind of moved the focus point around the screen and would put it on the eyeball. Nowadays, the camera says, oh, that's an eye of an animal. I'll just focus on it for you. And it's quite good. You then spend a lot more time focusing on things like composition and exposure and observing the animal's behavior instead of like, oh my God, I got to move this around and try to keep, the focus point on the animal. So
yeah, I think you've got a pretty good sample for that one here, right?
I do.
Like I remember you talking about
It's
like
an
this
elk.
guy.
Yeah. So I purposely took a picture of this elk, even though it's a super busy foreground and background, just to show you could. And I thought it was kind of cool. He reminded me of a pirate with the leaf over his eye. You could certainly set a small focus area, but the camera might still grab that leaf that's on his left eye. So the technology basically says, oh, that's an eyeball. It only had one, but it was more than happy to immediately focus on that. And even when the animal would move and go to a new opening, I didn't have to remove a focus point. It basically just kept the eye in focus, which was super cool.
That's awesome. I mean, that's huge. But like the eyes are the most important thing, right? Everything else
eyes
can
aren't
be
sharp. Yep.
Yeah.
Doesn't really matter.
awesome.
Yeah. Thanks.
That's a huge benefit.
Yes. That's probably besides the stabilization, that's the largest benefit that I've been able to take advantage of by using some of the latest cameras. So.
Right. All right. So let's go out and take some pictures. I've got my settings dialed in, or maybe I've just set this on sports mode.
Right.
That's just the beginning, right? Now, where do I have to go from here?
Yeah. So do you want to first talk about some of the animal behavior stuff before we get into the specific spots?
Yeah. Well, first of all, animal behavior and like my behavior as a photographer, like what do I need to do? Right.
So one of my favorite phrases, humans, when they're photographing wildlife, especially for the first time or two, they walk somewhere between the speed of sound and the speed of light. And then they wonder why they don't see anything. You need to slow way down. The more you can observe and kind of keep your head on swivel, the more subjects you're going to be able to photograph. Very seldom, like of all the pictures that I'm going to show today, very seldom are they where I pursued the animal. Oftentimes, I let the animal come to me, or I kind of went to a joint meeting area where I anticipated maybe the animal might go this way if I don't, pressure it and get too close to it.
Okay. Right. And this applies like even in your backyard, right? Even
That's
for
right.
if you're just starting out and you're just like hanging out in the morning with your coffee.
Yeah. And one of the cool things with photographing around your home is you can actually photograph out of your car or out of a window. And that acts like a blind. So oftentimes the animals will come much closer than if you're just sitting out in like a lawn chair in your backyard.
Yeah. I mean, I don't do a ton of wildlife photography myself, but somewhere around last spring, it was around this time, I started seeing these guys.
Oh, cool.
Right. And yeah, it was a matter of like, I spent the summer photographing the rabbits that moved in underneath my neighbor's deck. And that's kind of what I did to occupy myself in the year of the pandemic, right?
That's right.
But that was just kind of noticing these guys, and just like I knew that if I got any closer, I would spook them and they would take off. And man, they're quick. They can really move when they want to.
Yep.
Right. So it was just a matter of like sit and wait and just like kind of hang out and wait for them to hop around, and maybe they would get closer, maybe they wouldn't.
Right. Yeah.
What was weird was.
Go ahead.
No, what were you saying?
No, go ahead, Scott.
Oh, it was interesting that like after a while, I kind of like built myself a little blind.
Oh, nice.
Like I opened up the basement doors and put a tarp down. And what I found was that after a couple months, I had better luck not using the blind.
Interesting.
They started to get used to like, okay, there's this guy with his camera sitting there next to the fence.
All right.
And like, I could move around a little bit and they would be fine. If I was hidden behind the blind and I moved around a little bit, they would take off immediately.
Okay. So that threat level was perceived
like they couldn't see that it was me.
Right.
They just heard that it was something rustling around back there.
Yeah.
It was the weirdest thing.
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. And I've experienced that as well. When doing waterfowl, I will shoot out of a blind a lot. Mm-hmm. Some species are oblivious once you're in the blind, and then other species like mergansers and wood ducks, they know sound is coming from the blind, you moving around, or if your camera still clicks when you take a picture, and that really freaks them out sometimes in comparison to standing a little further back and letting them see you out in the open. Yeah,
that was definitely something that I noticed like early on when I was taking these pictures, was that I'd fire a couple of shots on burst mode and like it would rattle off 6 or 8 photos. And they would all like perk up and look around like, what the heck's going on? So I did much better like with keeping like a natural behavior by switching over to that silent shooting mode on my mirrorless camera.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that was another thing with especially doing a lot of foxes that are a little bit more shy. The silent really was awesome because it didn't change their behavior at all. They would sometimes hear my camera from 100 feet away, and unfortunately, even with a long lens, 100 feet is too far to get a good photo. You really need them to be about 20 or 30 feet away. So having a camera that didn't make any noise when I took pictures to give away my position was huge.
Oh, thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. So definitely take your time.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that you're constantly observing your surroundings, and don't be afraid to sit and wait. That urge is there to constantly push on and explore, but you'll do much better typically if you can just sit and let the animal come to you.
Right. But now I suppose you've got to think about like you're going to pick some spots where you're going to have a little better chance, right?
Yeah. Some of the notes that I wanted to touch on, if you can try to get to an area where 2 habitat types come together, or even better yet, 3. An example I'll give is a wood line along a field. So this is actually behind Dan's store, believe it or not. There are occasionally foxes. And you don't often see the foxes as often out in the open unless it's dark, but they will oftentimes walk just inside the wood line. So if you can set up near those areas, you'll be much more successful. Or areas where like a stream meets a forested area will be much more effective than just the forested area by itself. Having that extra resources there for the animal really brings it in. Thanks, Carol.
Okay, so yeah, awesome. Okay, so two different habitats. We're talking like field versus forest, or stream versus forest, or something where you've got multiple things kind of button up against each other.
That's right. Animals will almost always prefer that because there's more opportunities, more resources for them. This is a cute one.
I like this one.
This is the foxes again here at Dan. So again, didn't have to really go that far. I just came into work early and I ended up taking this picture around 7 a.m.
So what time of year would this be?
This is now. This is about 3 years ago, almost to the day. Like late April, early May is when you're going to find baby foxes. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right. So like you're looking at habitat, you're looking at time of year, you're looking at time of day, and all those things kind of
and
increase your odds of finding these guys.
There's a seasonality that you'll learn, the patterns and rhythms of nature. Baby foxes need a lot of food. Mom and dad are a little bit more preoccupied this time of year and might not be quite as aware of, photographers sitting there waiting to get photos, as opposed to once the babies are big and they don't have to feed them, they're likely going to be a little bit shyer. And
Gotcha.
the same thing goes for, migratory birds. If they just traveled 1,000 miles in the month of May because they're coming from Central America or Florida or something like that, it's much easier to photograph them because they are looking for literally anything to eat, as opposed to, July or August, where they've already been here for several months and are not as apt to be starving.
Oh, good point from Jim. Some of my friends who hunt provide great insight from their trail cam footage, clues for time and place and location.
Yeah, I employ 2 of them.
Oh, really? Okay.
I do. And that kind of allows me to get the timing of things down. Like, I love to photograph fawns, but that's a very seasonal thing. You're going to go out sometime around June 8th or June 14th or something like that. And if I see fawns on my trail camera, I know I have fawns.
Okay. So you just like pick a spot to set those things out and
basically
I'm
basically always looking for those habitat types coming together. And with deer, at least, they make pretty obvious paths because they like to use the same pathway over and over. So I try to put it at intersections because, again, you're increasing your chances. You have 2 lanes of travel coming together into one spot.
I hadn't really thought of them as intersections. Now I'm picturing little deer stoplights out there. But
anything you can do to up your chances.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So, like, say I spot some kind of wildlife in my city park. Like I said, I saw like a muskrat along the Monocacy here. Like, how am I going to make a plan to say, okay, I want to photograph that guy?
So Google is actually your best friend. You can actually start to learn the types of food that they prefer. So they're going to congregate more in certain areas. Like, you might have saw them traveling to one of those more preferred areas. So you might not see them again in that spot. You also have to kind of look at what do they live in? What's their house? In the case of a muskrat or a mink, they go into the bank. And you want to use your long lens or your binocular to kind of scout way downstream without having to disturb them. I tell people all the time, animals' homes are pretty easy to recognize once you know what to look for, but having a lot more zoom helps a lot to pick out little things like scratches on tree bark or scratches on the earth where something's going in and out. So once you find their home, chances are you're going to be much more successful than just randomly hoping that they cross whatever area you're sitting in.
Right. Okay, so look for that, the push up or the hole in the muddy bank or something like that.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Or a cavity in a tree. Like, that's one of the best ways to try to find woodpeckers and owls and things like that is, see what's been going in and out, or even sometimes raccoons. I found a lot of raccoons using old, burrows excavated by woodpeckers and stuff like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm thinking, like, what time of day there's got to be raccoons hanging around the city.
There are definitely raccoons within Allentown city limits, but again, early. Typically when I see them, they're asleep by 7:30 or 8 a.m. So they're out, doing their thing early.
Right. All right. So if I want to venture out, then we're going to like wander out and take a look at some wildlife photography. Where are we going and what kind of a plan are we making for going out there?
So I'll kind of start with areas closest to Allentown for our viewers. and then I'll kind of expand in an ever increasing perimeter. And I'll talk about some specifics of what subject to see, what time of year, if I can. So this is probably the most valuable part of the show because it'll give you a lot of resources.
Nice.
All
Sharing
right.
all your secrets with us.
Oh,
Write these down.
Most of the secrets. So starting with Jordan Parkway, this is actually a pretty often overlooked space. It has
Okay.
a lot of large open meadows, but it also, of course, has the Jordan Creek going through. And there's a pretty good network of hiking and biking trails that will give you access in a way that the animals are already used to. So one of the things, if an animal is
Right.
used to seeing a jogger or a biker, if
Mhm.
you take the same mode of travel and then, quietly sit down just off the trail, they're a lot less freaked out than if you just come, making noise through the brush and disturbing them.
Right.
So I photographed foxes at Jordan Parkway. I photographed a lot of ducks. Every once in a while, I'll see a hawk and an eagle because there are actually, believe it or not, some eagle nests not too far from here. So Jordan can be a wonderful resource, and it's also very good for the spring migration for warblers. All that vegetation along the Jordan Creek brings in lots of insects, and of course, birds love insects. So
Mhm. So let's see. I know you've got some photos in here. Which ones are the good Jordan Parkway pictures?
Jordan Parkway, I don't know if I have a specific image in there, but the images from Lehigh Parkway will be very similar because it's the same type of
Okay.
habitat. So if you want to pull a few of those up, that would be cool. So this is actually a picture from South Mountain, which we'll talk about in a little bit. There should be some labeled. That's okay. There should be some. There we go. So this is kind of like how Jordan looks. It's a lot of larger, mature tulip, poplar, ash, oak with an understory, and there's tons of deer. Like I said, I've definitely seen foxes multiple times there. And the area behind Lenhart's Road near the disc golf course is one of the better areas I found.
All right.
And then we'll move into Center City, Allentown. There's actually a lot of wildlife to be found at Lake Muhlenberg and Cedar Beach.
I would never have thought to go looking for wildlife at Cedar Beach Park.
I'll tell you what, some of the best flight shots I've ever gotten of merganser ducks are at Lake Muhlenberg. That narrow corridor surrounded by urban areas on both sides kind of funnels the wildlife. For better or for worse, they're, in a narrow strip of undeveloped land. And I've seen wood ducks there on occasion. I've seen lots of geese, swans on occasion. I've seen sometimes hawks, and believe it or not, even owls. I won't give the specific area for the owls just because I don't want them to get too pressured. But if you spend enough time there and you know what owls like to live in, it's not too hard to find out where they are. And this is within Allentown city limits. Yeah. And this is actually a shot of a wood duck up on the Bushkill Creek, which will be one of the last spots we talk about.
Okay.
So next on the list, I believe, is South Mountain Preserve.
All right. So Trexler Park, South Mountain Preserve. What's up on South Mountain Preserve? South Mountain Preserve is a large chunk of pretty serious forest, right?
Yeah, it's our largest unbroken forested tract outside of the Blue Mountain. So it's kind of like this little island of about 800 to 1,000 acres that's owned by the city of Allentown and Wildlands Conservancy. And anytime you have large mature forest, you get species that you don't normally find. So even though it's only a few blocks from Allentown city limits, I've photographed warblers there that normally I go to the Poconos for. And they're, perfectly happy because of the mature trees that they can call home.
Wow.
There's a lot of foxes there. There's a lot of deer. And it's probably the best place in all of Lehigh County for amphibians. Just be very careful. Yeah, I have a shot actually of a spring peeper I took about a month ago there. It's an absolutely phenomenal spot. There's tons of vernal pools. And if you know anything about vernal pools, that's what these amphibians need to be able to breed and reproduce. So really wonderful opportunity. This is actually at night using a little flashlight to provide the light source. So I'm not even using a flash.
Just a flashlight.
Just a
And be out
flashlight.
there hunting for. How do you find spring peepers in the dark?
You hear them. They're
Oh,
very loud.
okay. Yeah.
So in this case, they're very apt to get on a high perch because they want to sound really good for the ladies.
Okay.
So he's about eye level. I didn't even have to bend down. I literally walked up to this little tree and there he was.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah. Lots of salamanders there. I don't have any shots of salamanders. There are some endangered species there. So please be respectful with those populations as well. But really phenomenal opportunity. And it's a place where you actually don't feel like you're in the Lehigh Valley anymore, especially when you get to some of the interior locations, because there's 4 and 5 foot diameter trees on that mountain.
Oh,
And
wow.
giant boulders from glaciers and stuff. So really cool property.
Nice.
Yeah, and Trexler Park we'll touch on. You briefly mentioned that. This is Trexler Park within Allentown city limits, not Trexler Game Preserve. Trexler Park is a really good opportunity for people that often find, I can't get close enough to the birds. I wish that I could get birds closer, but they fly away. For better or for worse, Trexler Park has a long history of people photographing birds, joggers using the trail network, and the birds come very close. They're actually curious and sometimes will even land on your camera or tripod. Yeah, it's pretty wild. Chickadees, especially, titmice. I have a photo somewhere of one on the end of my wife's lens that I was looking for to show in this presentation. So really great opportunity. If you find that you just can't get close enough to birds, you're not going to find the exotic species like South Mountain, but you're going to find birds that are going to allow you to get very close and get good photos.
Nice.
Yeah. There you go.
So
that
those,
was
like those warblers would be like this guy.
A scarlet tanager, one of my favorite birds because they're so vibrant. I say to people, it's kind of like if a robin took singing lessons and you got that really vibrant red. These guys breed on South Mountain. There's a lot of them. The lower trails that are closest to the parking lots actually are some of the best places to find them, which is kind of cool because you don't have to walk as far.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you can literally walk in 100 feet and see scarlet tanagers this time of year on South Mountain, which is super cool.
That's awesome.
You'll also see a bunch of like other really cool species like grosbeaks and warblers. So I highly recommend getting like an Audubon field guide because a good day on South Mountain might net you 20 or 30 new species if you're not already a birder.
And that's just right over here, like South Mountain, right? Like,
yeah. So there's 3 trailheads: Alpine Street, Emmaus, Ithaca Park, Allentown, and then Homestead Park, Emmaus, which is behind like the Cintas Recycling Center. And all 3 trailheads are great. You can actually walk from one to the other. They're interconnected with trails. And that can be a great walk for someone that doesn't wish to actually climb up the face of the mountain because there is a pretty good amount of elevation change, about 550 feet from the bottom to the top.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that sounds great.
It is a wonderful gem that we have here in the Lehigh Valley. And speaking of my other favorite gem is Trexler Nature Preserve. So what's cool about Trexler Nature Preserve, of course, is there's a zoo. And of course, with zoos, you can get very close to animals, so you can practice. Once you've practiced, though, you can take those skills and then use them on things like the deer and foxes. I've actually even every once in a while seen otters in the Jordan Creek there, which are very
no way.
Valley. Yep. I've seen mink and muskrat. So really awesome park. It's actually our largest park, but it's not super forested. It's mostly meadow, which can work in your advantage. There's definitely different species that like meadow, but it's about 1,000 acres. And the area adjacent to Fireman's Trail, there's trail maps that will allow you to kind of find out where I'm talking about, are a really good opportunity for woodpeckers. It's a good opportunity for warblers and other songbirds. And it kind of goes along the edge of a ridge with some springs. And anytime the trail crosses one of those springs, here we have that 2 habitat types. We have a moist area, and then we have that meadowy area coming together. So you'll oftentimes find many more species there than you would just out in the open meadow.
That's fantastic. All right, so let's just take a look at some of these pictures that you've got going on here, just so we can kind of review back through some of these things. So you said that this one was not the Parkway. This one was Bushkill,
right? Bushkill Creek. This is a little bit outside of the immediately Lehigh Valley, but it's only a couple miles north of Easton. Hen Pump Park, which you can put into Google Maps, it will come up, has a very large population of wood ducks that are tame. Wood ducks aren't tame. I've sat in blinds for hours to photograph wood ducks in other counties, but at Hen Pump Park, they're 10 or 15 feet away. So there you go. If you want wood duck pictures, that's where to go. You'll also sometimes see mergansers there, muskrats, mink. I've seen white-tailed deer actually come down and get a drink right in the Bushkill Creek.
Right there in the park.
So really,
wow.
Yeah, and there's a nice little linear trail that you can use to kind of access the different areas. And again, the key is just to sit. The current's going to, push the ducks down to you as they're feeding. And I find that works much better than trying to follow after them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a kingfisher there that I chased around for the better part of a summer and never did manage to get a good shot of him.
So kingfishers are very easy to photograph once you learn their favorite perch.
Okay.
Because they're one of the most habitual birds in terms of perch preference. Use those binoculars, use that long lens. When you hear that long, kind of casting lure sound that they make, if you look up the kingfisher call, so you know what it sounds like.
Mm-hmm.
You want to look a couple hundred yards down, because if you see that bird perched, you make a mental note of it and you come back and you wait, and the bird is going to come back to that perch, which is super, super cool.
Oh, okay. So again, just 100% patience.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be hours. Like, especially Lehigh Parkway, there's a pretty healthy kingfisher population there, and the Bushkill. Yeah, indeed. You can get good, kingfisher shots with a 400 millimeter lens. You don't need to have a gigantic lens. You just have to sit and wait. Right. It doesn't have to be a long period of time, because they're very active, in the spring and summer time. So yeah, if you want to pull up a few more images, we'll talk about them.
Yeah, tell me about this guy.
This is Lehigh Parkway. I thought it was super neat to watch the herons kind of study the stream looking for trout. Anyone that's been to Lehigh Parkway, they know that they stock the Little Lehigh with trout, and the herons know it too. So they'll sit, in this case, a few feet above the water, and when a trout swims by, they grab it. So this is a perch that I've seen many herons use. That's a preferred perch. So I just sat there and waited, and one flew up within 15 minutes and, became a statue until a fish swam by.
Neat. Yeah, they do that where they sit perfectly still, right, until they see something thereafter.
Yep. This is also Lehigh Parkway.
I love the pose on this one.
Yeah, sometimes it's not about having the largest subject. It's just that interaction. And I was just sitting off of like the hiking and biking trail, only about 20 feet. And this guy just came walking through, browsing and eating. And because I wasn't moving, he got within 15 feet of me.
Oh, wow. Okay. So, and I'd love to, one of the things that Buddy talked about when we had him on was looking at gesture. Yeah. Pose, and the eye contact here is great.
Yeah. And not all the time will you get lucky to have the eye contact, but anytime you can, it can work wonderfully. And it's kind of interesting. You can learn like little tricks, like very lightly rustling your foot, not stomping or anything like that, because that's going to make them swivel their head and look at you, because it sounds like it could be maybe another deer, if they haven't picked you up, but you have to be ready to shoot, because once they've identified that you're a person, they may not be comfortable anymore and then may leave.
Right.
In this case, this guy didn't really care. Oh, one of my favorite subjects.
Yeah. So how close were you to this guy?
About 3 feet. This is not in the Lehigh Valley, so anyone that doesn't like snakes, you don't have to worry. But you don't have to go far out of the Lehigh Valley if you're into photographing reptiles. I'm not going to give specifics because they are kind of protected species, but I will say that Carbon and Luzerne County are wonderful. So if you want to do more with reptiles, we actually have lizards in Pennsylvania. A lot of people don't realize we have fence lizards, which are awesome to photograph. We have skinks, which are super cool. Some people call them blue tails. And of course, we have rattlesnakes. This is a timber rattler. It's a female. She's very pregnant. That's why she's so fat.
Oh, okay.
And this is just on a basking rock. Basically, they need to hang out on flat rocks and regulate their body temperature to help their young develop. So even though I'm very close, because she was very pregnant and because she's not coiled up, I wasn't at great risk being 3 feet away. If she had coiled up, that means she wants to strike. In this case, she's just trying to smell me with her tongue, trying to figure out why I'm, taking pictures of her. Venomous snakes like this actually can see heat. So they're going to see you way before you ever see them because of their camouflage. So they're kind of like the predator. They can just kind of pick out your heat signature.
Right.
Yeah. Any others?
I'm still stuck on 3 feet away from a timber rattler.
Sometimes it's closer. This is an example I threw in to talk about. You don't always have to make the subject big. Sometimes people are so focused on having this frame-filling subject, and sometimes if you have strong lead-in lines, I think the tree works pretty well here in the grass, in the cut meadow, in the nice light. The deer is the lightest thing in this frame, so even though it's not large in the frame, it really pops. And it kind of shows the deer's home. This is where it lives. If you take a super, super tight shot of an animal, you don't always get that appreciation of its home. You just kind of are like, okay, it's a deer with a background that's blurry.
Right, but this is like you got the deer, but in the landscape and part of the environment.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Thank you.
Love this one.
Shapes. This is a favorite log for this fox family. I've actually photographed multiple foxes, mom, dad, kids on this log. The reason for it is there's a black walnut tree right there. And guess what likes to eat black walnuts? Not the fox.
I was going to say like rodents, squirrels.
Yes.
Okay.
So the food source provides an opportunity for us as photographers. So knowing that there's a black walnut tree right there, the fox will oftentimes hunker down on the other side of that log and kind of wait for a squirrel to come in and get something to eat. And I've seen multiple interactions where they've nearly caught squirrels. I've never actually seen them catch them, but I know that they do because their fur is there. Let's just say that.
Right. Well, and I mean, the foxes keep coming back, right? So they must be.
They keep coming back. Yep.
Yeah. That's a neat shot. What time of year would this be? Because that's not the winter coat, right? He's look at trim in the summer coat there.
Yeah, this is like a June or July timeframe. I remember it being fairly hot and humid. And that's a little segue I'll give is even when you don't feel like going out, go out anyway. I was sitting all of 10 minutes, to be honest, when this fox came in. And I was like, well, that certainly was fruitful.
Yeah.
Mosquitoes biting me and, all the things. But I was just like, well, I'm really glad I came out here.
Yeah.
So now going back to this image. So would you believe that there's a chain link fence 2 feet to the deer's right?
Wait, where? To the deer's right, over here? On
So along the left edge as viewed
left
from
edge of the frame.
Yes. So
Really?
this is a natural funnel. In the fall, when deer are looking to breed, they use the same paths over and over. And I knew that this deer was not, especially with his big antlers, he was not about to try to go through all that brush. So I just sat and waited on the other end of this like fenced in corridor. And of course, the does that he wanted to get to were behind me. And the does are much more tolerant of people. He wasn't, but because what he wanted was through me, he still came right to me. So I was able to get a really cool shot. And by having a longer lens, I was using, I think, a 600 millimeter on this. I was able to crop out the fence and make it look very natural, despite it being, an Emmaus Park, so to speak.
Yeah, so this is right there on South Mountain, but now we're talking about just like with the fox, right? Like, okay, you were there for 10 minutes, but how much work ahead of time went into, okay, I got to think about behavior. I got to think about where they go and what's going on here.
Yeah, so I like to go out in the middle of the day, not to photograph, but to scout and kind of observe where are the deer walking? What's their travel corridors? I look even for how often are they going to the bathroom? That tells you how often deer are in that area. If there's an old path, but there's no poop, there's probably not many deer using it.
Gotcha.
So in this case, I knew it was a very heavily used corridor, and it was just a matter of getting there early enough. And sure enough, I saw this guy making his way along the corridor, and I was like, all right, I'm just walk to the other end of the chain link fence because he's not going to want to fight all that brush, and he's going to have to come out pretty close to me. And he did.
So about how long do you sit in, like, okay, you know where you're going to go. About how long are you in this spot?
So this spot or any spot, I don't like to move unless given a really strong reason to for at least 30 minutes. Because typically it takes most species that are used to people about 10 or 15 minutes to settle down. Species that are a little bit more shy or wary, it could take them 20 or 30 minutes, and they're not going to move until they feel comfortable. And if you get up again, they're not going to be comfortable, and they're going to, not give you that opportunity. So, sometimes, again, that urge is to move and keep going, but just give yourself that chance. Sit there for 30 minutes, and if nothing comes, maybe move on. But if you put the homework in, usually you'll be successful more times than not.
Excellent. That's a great tip. Like, to have 30 minutes is kind of my game plan. Like, that's how long, and don't plan on seeing anything for the first 15.
You might, but usually you won't. And that's what's really key, to just kind of hunker down. And I like to just focus on, listening to the other species that are a little bit more tolerant of people, because they're really going to tell you what else might be there. If you have a bunch of songbirds and all of a sudden they shut up, there's probably a hawk.
Oh, right.
If you have a bunch of squirrels and they start scolding, if you ever heard that high pitched sound that they make, there's probably a fox. Or if you're in areas of other parts of the state, it could be a bobcat or a coyote. It could even be a black bear. The bear's not going to try to eat them, but they still will scold it. And they can be like an extra set of eyes for you. It's like a little surveillance system. And if you pay attention to them, you'll see more wildlife.
Yeah. I've noticed that, like, just going out for a walk in the afternoon, I'll hear the crows start yelling.
Yep.
And look around, and there's a red-tailed hawk.
Yep. They want to harass that red tail.
Yeah.
Yes. This is a dear friend to me. I've actually photographed this buck for over 4 years. He's getting pretty old.
Wow.
His
a dear friend. I see what you did there.
Yes, dear friend. He's getting pretty old, so his antlers are actually starting to shrink. I actually did find his antlers this year, which I'm really excited about. That's another opportunity to go out and scout. You can actually find antlers and stuff. But this is 1 minute before sunset, so that's why the light is so warm. And again, perfect example to just try to go out and make that effort. I had taught a class at Conowingo on photographing bald eagles earlier in the day. I knew I only had 45 minutes before it was going to be dark. I said to my wife, you know what? We've been outside all day. Let's go outside some more if you don't mind. She's like, yeah, sure. Why not? And we sat, and sure enough, within about 25 or 30 minutes, this guy came down, and what he's doing, he's actually picking the little barberry red berries off of that bush with his lips and tongue. And just the out of focus area in the foreground, this is one of my favorite things to do, is actually more berries. I try to purposely put things that are lit really well in the foreground to make kind of a wash of color.
Yeah.
People want to get rid of that stuff. I want to have it as like a framing device.
Yeah.
Same idea. Hey, look at that. That was a good segue. This is another example of just having that stuff to kind of frame an animal. And this is where, technology like the Animal Eye autofocus can be helpful, especially as the foreground might become even busier. Here I had a pretty big opening, and I could, move a focus point if I needed to. But in this case, it just focused on her eye. And this is also in South Mountain.
Yeah. And that's that great, layers of foreground, middle ground, background.
Yep. Yeah, just try to tell a little bit more of a story. What drew me to the subject. I purposely picked this spot to sit because in the evening it gives this awesome rim light on any animals that you would get, because the animals are almost 3/4 lit. They're not quite backlit, but you can kind of see that rim on the side of the animals, and it really helped to make them stand out over the background. And kind of made them look extra fluffy. This is right at the beginning of the pandemic last year. I said to my wife, I don't know how long, we're not going to be working. We were closed, obviously for a little bit, but we're certainly going to make some opportunities to go out and do some wildlife photography. And thankfully we did.
All right, so now that's another layer of we're thinking about is, okay, where are they going to be? What time of day? Animal behavior, and then where's the light coming from?
That's right.
Okay, we keep adding to the list.
That's right. And you'll actually learn to spot areas based on, even if there's not an animal there, you're like, oh wow, the light's really nice coming into this opening. Maybe I should sit here. Is there, can I find clues that there might have been animal behavior or animal activity, here that would then make it more worth my time instead of just hoping by random chance something comes through.
You know, that's funny because that's a thing that I do with street photography, and I never thought to apply it to wildlife.
Same
like
concept.
I'll find a spot, like the light is really good at this intersection. If somebody comes walking through here, it's going to be a great shot. Yeah, it's exact same deal.
Yep. Yeah, that's awesome.
We saw that guy, but this one is one of my favorites.
Yeah, this is actually the same meadow that the rimlet deer were in. And again, I didn't have a lot of time. This was actually before work. Went out for about an hour. We got an inch of snow. It was a very wet snow. It clung to everything. In this case, I don't know if you can zoom in or not, but there's actually snow on the deer's nose because she was sleeping. She was kind of bedded down, and she got up, and I was like, oh, wow, you weren't there a second ago. And, she's looking at me because she's like, whoa, you weren't there a second ago. But I was sitting there waiting. So really cool eye contact, really cool story. And I just love the texture of all the fluffy snow on everything too.
Yeah.
This guy's got a battle wound. Can anyone see his lip is a little tore up?
Oh, yeah.
Uh-huh. Just like street photography, sometimes your animals will have some character. This is a buck that was the dominant buck in the area, and a much larger buck moved in, and he kind of got his butt kicked. He was very actively searching for female deer. So I sat in an area where I know that female deer feed a lot in the morning, and it's really comical to watch. They're kind of like a hound dog. He had his head down, sniffing along, trying to find where the ladies are at. And then he realized that I was sitting down Indian style about 15 feet from him. And that's where he has that kind of startled look to his face because, he was in the zone, and all of a sudden he's like, oh, wow, where did you come from?
So, okay. So this was, where is this, South Mountain again?
This is South Mountain, yep.
Okay. And then, what's your process for doing that homework of, okay, this is where I know females like to feed in this area?
Yeah, so again, just
That's
sometimes
scouting.
observing from a great distance. If you're fortunate enough to have a large enough field, you're not going to get great photos that night, but if you sit a couple 100 yards away, you can tell specifically where deer like to go in a meadow. There might be more desirable food there, or whatever the case may be. It might be a proximity to cover or whatever. Then you move in and you come in the dark, and then you sit and wait, and you wait for the activity to kind of form around you, if you will. Also in the evening. So this is the closest that I've gotten to one of the foxes catching a squirrel. He's actually staring. I think he's kind of mad. He missed the squirrel by inches. And I just love the sweet, warm light and his, gaze looking up in the tree at the squirrel and kind of scowling at him. And this is that same log in the other photo, just to kind of show that repeated behavior. I have a bunch of other photos from that same exact spot. It's just, about learning those.
Okay. So it looks like different just because of maybe position a little bit, or
completely
composed,
different because I'm sitting about 10 feet further down on a down tree. So we didn't talk about this early on, but one of the things you can help to up your chances is to break up your outline. So if you can sit on a down tree and there's a lot of brush behind you, you no longer are silhouetted to animals. If you can sit with your butt on the ground with a big tree against your back, you're no longer silhouetted to animals, and they're going to come a lot closer if you can do that. Animals are pretty good at picking out silhouettes.
Okay.
So in this case, this fox had no idea that I was there. And because my camera can shoot silently, he had no idea I was taking his pictures. So really wonderful interaction.
Yeah, that's great. So do we have to worry about like being upwind of the foxes when you're out there looking for them?
So in some of the parks, no, because they're just so used to people and their scents swirling everywhere. In a place
Okay.
like South Mountain or Trexler Game Preserve, because you might be pretty far from other people and they may not, be used to that. Yeah, you definitely do.
Okay.
So just watching like grasses in the direction that they're moving.
Right.
Thanks, Phil. You take great photos. I've seen them. So, and I really appreciate you watching tonight too.
Yeah.
Any others?
But yeah, I mean, I think that's a thing that I noticed, like even photographing the rabbits, is I would kind of hang off to the side where I've got another bush planted and be like, tucked in among the leaves rather than just like flopped in the middle of the yard.
Yep. Makes a huge difference. And the lower you can get, the more intimate the wildlife will appear, the more interesting. When you shoot down, you tend to not get as nice of separation from the subject to the background. In this case, I'm only, 2.5 feet off the ground because I'm, basically sitting on the ground.
Right. So you want to be like down at their eye level.
That's right. Yep. And it makes you less intimidating.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Any others?
I think that's about all the photos we've got for tonight. So unless there are any other questions, I always like to make sure that we got everybody's. We had a couple of good questions tonight and a couple of good insights. And Phil, don't sell your stuff.
Definitely not.
But what you can do is go out and practice, right? I guess it's all about, even if it's just sitting in the backyard, just spending some time.
Yep. I don't know how many.
For me, I'm a little like hyperactive sometimes, so I think I need to just spending some time.
It's very cathartic. It leads to improving your ability to be patient and wait, and putting in that time photographing less interesting subjects, whether it be squirrels or bunnies or ducks or whatever, will pay huge dividends when the opportunity presents itself like this in front of you. You'll be ready. You won't have to fumble with settings or anything like that because you've done it over and over.
Right. Yeah. And I know these guys are around town, right? Like occasionally I'm sitting outside at night and I hear a red fox screaming, like, and I'm in the middle of Bethlehem and I know they're here someplace, right?
They're definitely there. They're in Allentown. They're in most of the communities in the Lehigh Valley. So they're very adaptable.
Right. Even like, skunks are cool. I need to figure out how to photograph them in, the absolute darkness where I see them. But
I've definitely photographed some skunks, and occasionally you will see them out in the daytime. But again, it's very early. If anyone wants to look up a fun word of the day, it's crepuscular. And that basically means animals that are active at dawn and dusk.
Right.
And most of our species are crepuscular. Cool.
Oh, well, thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Phil.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, I
have
a passion for this, and anyone that ever wants to pick my brain, feel free.
Yeah, for sure. I'll have you back on sometime to go over some other stuff, because this is like just the idea that we can kind of just go out into the backyard and take some of these things that we talked about and start working on them right away. Like this is stuff you can do tomorrow morning, get up nice and early and go out there and play around with some of this stuff.
Yeah. And like I said, don't let time be a factor. If you can only carve out an hour, don't be like, well, I'll never have a chance to see whatever you saw. Some of the shots that I showed, I was, like I said, sitting there for 20 or 25 minutes. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Definitely some great stuff to try out. Thanks so much for being with us tonight. Everybody who stopped by and everybody who commented, and thanks again to Steve. Steve is just a wealth of knowledge. If you ever stop by the store to pick his brain about, foxes or skunks or mushrooms or trees or stars or just a fantastic resource. And we're super glad to have you on tonight.
Thank you. It was
so, yeah, super fun.
Awesome.
Oh, thanks. Well, that's about going to do it for us tonight. I hope we will see you around next time. Thanks thanks for joining us on the Wednesday Night Photo Show. Get out your camera and go take some pictures.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Good night,
Have a great
everybody.
day, and good luck.